Thank you so much for being here tonight at our Science on Tap. This is our first one of this 2026, so thank you for coming in. For those of you that are in the room, thanks for coming through the snow if that was your issue. We'll make sure to get you out of here on time to make sure you can get home safely. This is a hybrid event, so we have folks online and folks in the room. For those folks that are online, thank you also for being here. If you have any issues or questions for tonight's speaker, make sure to put them into the chat box. We have a volunteer, Roseanne, who will make sure that she can read out all those questions and help you with any technical issues. For folks in the room, I'm recognizing a few faces, but I also see some new folks here, so welcome to the Hatfield Marine Science Center. When we get to questions and answers, if you just raise your hand, I'll bring you this mic, and that way folks online can hear as well, so that way we can have a good hybrid event. But again, welcome so much for being here. A couple of quick announcements. I wanted to let everyone know that our next Science on Tap will be March 18th. We have Isla, I gotta find her last name, Hodgkinsing, who is going to be here from the University of Stirling in Scotland, who's going to be talking about how humans interact with conservation of sharks. And she added a little note that said, and everything else. So come on in next month on March 18th to hear our next Science on Tap speaker. If you have any interest in being a part of these events, you can go onto the Hatfield website, go to the events page. Everything you need to join us on site or online is there for every one of these events every month. So I hope you join us in whatever format works for you. But I wanted to just get us rolling here with tonight's speaker as I introduced Dr. Jack Barth. Jack is a professor of oceanography at Oregon State University's College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. He received his PhD in oceanography from MIT and Woods Hole's Oceanographic Institute's Joint Program in Oceanography. And his research seeks to understand how coastal ocean circulation and water properties shape and influence marine ecosystems using autonomous underwater gliders, robots, and anything to see below the sea. So his research has he led a bunch of research projects, technology development, and ocean observing projects off of Oregon coast, but also around the world. He is highly published on coastal oceanography and marine ecosystems, and Jack is also the board member of the Western Flyer Foundation, and so that is what we're going to learn about today. So Jack, come on up.
All right, thank you, Cinnamon. So she says I have to stay in this box. I'm really bad at that. Thanks for coming tonight. I recognize many of you. Welcome to others for the first time to hear this tale. I'm not going to lecture on coastal oceanography or underwater robots. This is a really fun story, and I'm going to try to explain how I got involved and how cool it is. So we're going to be talking about the Western Flyer. There's a slide I have in a few minutes that says maybe one of the most famous fishing vessels of all time. And I'll explain to you why that is. This is a stunning photo of the Western Flyer in the Gulf of California from our trip there this last spring. And it's by Pat Webster. And I'll say a little bit more about Pat in a minute. But a good thing to do on expeditions is bring a National Geographic photographer, because you get photographs like that instead of my lousy ones. Okay, which one is it, Cinnamon? Oh, we have to have it on the thing. Bingo. Okay, so this is going to be a tale of the Western Flyer in its original heyday as a sardine seiner in the Monterey Bay sardine fishery, how it was lost and sunk and refound and refloated and restored. And I'll tell you that story. And notice the bridge in the background of this photo. This is when the vessel came down the coast from being restored in Port Townsend, Washington. Stopped ever so briefly in Newport and then headed down to Monterey Bay and the rest of the recent adventures. And some of us were lucky enough to see her while she was here, but we did it really quietly. It was unannounced because we didn't know when it was going to be here or any of that. But this time at the end, I'm going to tell you that we would like to come up here in May and let all of you tour this amazing vessel. So I'm going to break this up into parts. It's really this tale of connection that this vessel provides and the people involved and this idea of the arts and humanities and natural science and all those things swirling together. And I'll tell you about John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts' trip to the Gulf of California in 1940, the restoration, and then the Western Flyer being ready to be a vessel for research and education up and down the North American coast. And then I'm going to tell you about us going back to the Baja 85 years later, almost to the day of the original expedition. So we just finished that, and I'll show you some photos from that guy. And then, like I said, we're going to try to get up here in the spring. So there's lots to cover, but I wanted to just do a little bit from the log from the Sea of Cortez and just think about some of the beautiful phrases that come out of that book. The photograph is doing a CTD, conductivity temperature depth cast, from the modern Western Flyer in Monterey Bay. So this is in La Paz, which I'll show you some pictures from La Paz in the Gulf. And Steinbeck and Ricketts were commenting about all those young boys that wanted to help them out by selling them things and finding things and all sorts of stuff. It says, it is easy to remember when we were small and lay on our stomachs beside a tide pool, and our minds and eyes went so deeply into it that size and identity were lost. And the creeping hermit crab was our size, and the tiny octopus a monster. It is very possible that we, and even those who probe space with equations, simply extend this wonder. So I encourage you to crack open the log again if you haven't lately. And it's just full of these beautiful phrases. So I'm an equation guy, right? I'm a physical oceanographer. I write equations all the time. But there's this wonder in just observing the world and being part of it. So there's several characters in this story, starting with these two. So John Steinbeck, the famous author, and I'll show you a couple of his books that are relevant, and then Ed Ricketts on the right, the marine biologist. They were both born roughly around 1900, so they were in the Monterey Bay area and got to know each other in the 30s and struck up a friendship. In the late 30s, they were both coming off some very interesting and successful times. Here's John Steinbeck, the author, had published Tortilla Flat, In Dubious Battle, and then his seminal work, The Grapes of Wrath, in 1939. And he was a little bit burned out from that. There was some criticism of the whole book and all that, and he and Ed Ricketts said, we might need a little adventure to take a break from this. So this is setting up their trip to the Gulf of California. The other character, Ed Ricketts, a kind of a self-taught marine ecologist, and published this book that he worked on for many, many years called Between Pacific Tides. And this is a look at the rocky intertidal ecology, the sandy seashores, and the adjacent subtidal ocean from an ecology point of view. And it was an approach towards that science rather than just looking at individual organisms. You know, how many tentacles do they have? How do they feed? That sort of thing. By looking at it instead of where are the ecological niches, say in the intertidal, from the high to the low, and how do the organisms interact with each other? So he introduced that concept to what's carried on now, how we all think about ecology at this time. So that was also in 1939 with Jack Calvin. And then it was subsequently published in many, many editions. I think it's the most successful book out of the Stanford University Press. And you can see the later editions have contributions from Joel Hedgepeth, who was a marine biologist that was involved here in Yacuna Bay and many other places. So there's an Oregon connection here. Who's cracked open this book? Between Pacific Tides. I know Steve Rumrill has. He probably knows some stuff about that book. There's an introduction in it by John Steinbeck. And you're going to see this phrase, stir curiosity. It's in that introduction in that book, not from the log. Third character is this one. So this is the Western Flyer, built in 1937 in Tacoma, Washington, of this beautiful tight grain old growth fir. She's 77 feet long, 20-foot beam across. Had a 165 horsepower diesel engine and went about 9 or 10 knots. So the marine operations folks here always tell me, Jack, all boats go 9 or 10 knots. That's just how it is. So one thing I didn't appreciate, and I did after being on the vessel, is that straight up and down prow. You don't really see that as much now, right? They're all swept back. But this is an amazing design for cutting through the waves. So having been on the vessel at full speed, breaking through the waves and looking out the stern, there's little to no wake. It slides through the water beautifully. So that 165 horsepower can result in that 9 or 10 knots. So I compare it to the Pacific Storm, one of our research vessels here at Oregon State, which is 84 feet, 24-foot beam, has a 520 horsepower Caterpillar engine, and it goes 9.5 knots, just like all the boats. Anybody been on the Pac Storm? Yep. So it's a typical size fishing vessel for this region, for the California current. All right, so the Western Flyer participated in the Pacific sardine fishery in Monterey Bay through the 1940s, and a little bit small there on the right, I have the sardine landings on the West Coast. And you can see the heyday of that in the 30s and 40s. In fact, I didn't put this photo in, and I should, as we found an old photo in the archives of Monterey Bay with like about 20 Western Flyers, maybe 30, just full of these boats that look just like the Western Flyer participating in the sardine fishery. In fact, the Western Flyer had some sister ships from the same shipyard with the word Western in front of it. I forget, Western Explorer, Western something, but this is the Western Flyer that got lucky enough to be chosen for the trip down to Baja with Steinbeck and Ricketts. So you can also see the crash of the sardine fishery there in the 40s. So these vessels were participating, and then they had to find something else to do. So what the Flyer did was come north and work in the Oregon, Washington, and Southeast Alaska fisheries for many, many years. So let's say it participated in the sardine from 37 to 45. Let's just say that's 8 years, right? Well, it had from 1945 to 1985 or more participating in our fisheries. So it spent way more time up here than it did in the Monterey Bay area. Hence another reason why I want to get it up to this part of the world. This is another plot of the pelagic fish catches across the Pacific. So these are things we know now as in fisheries and oceanography. that there are boom and busts, and they're related to the environment and the decadal oscillations in the ocean affecting the fish populations. Now, there's no doubt that the fishing plays some role, but there's also the environment changing the conditions. And you can see the collapse there of the California current stock in the 40s, also linked with across the Pacific in Japan. And then you can see it coming back again in two of those places in the 80s, and just a little bit now in the California current. And then just another historical thing, there's a big California-based fishery and oceanography observing program called CalCoffee. It's probably the longest time series we have where they've looked at the environment and the fish and the zooplankton, phytoplankton, fish eggs, etc. Started in 1949 in response to that collapse of the fishery, that, hey, we better start paying attention to the environment and the fish populations. Okay, so Steinbeck and Ricketts needed a break. They just both published these books. And somebody asked me earlier, how did they pay for this? And I'm pretty sure it was the royalties from the Grapes of Wrath that paid for this charter on the Western Flyer for 6 weeks, March and April of 1940. Of course, there was another thing going on at the same time, right? World War II. And so they did this expedition during that time, down to the Sea of Cortez, which is that body of water between the Baja Peninsula and mainland Mexico, opened up in a tectonic rift and thousands of meters deep, also known as the Gulf of California. And it's a hugely productive area, which I'll show you a little bit along the way here. But that's a satellite image of the plankton in the surface waters, showing the blooming in the northern Gulf. And that turns out to be an effect of water moving in and out of the Gulf, being stirred up by these what we call the midriff islands in the middle of the Gulf, bringing nutrients up towards the surface, etc. So I've been talking to my remote sensing colleagues, the people that look from satellites, and they say, oh yeah, Baja, that's the best place in the world to work if you're in satellite imagery, because it's never cloudy. So they do all their calibrations and things down there. So Steinbeck and Ricketts departed, sailed south, rounded Cabo San Lucas. That's actually where they landed first, and then proceeded around the corner up towards La Paz, collecting specimens along the way at various rocky intertidal sites. They were trying to do a macro level description of the ecosystems in the Gulf. Lots of collections. So if you remember from the book all the jars and how they had to bring along the preservatives and put all these things down in the hold. I'm going to show you how we use the hold now as a scientific laboratory. Over 560 species of marine invertebrates and 40 new undescribed species. When we went down this time, we didn't take any specimens. So the world has changed, right? So you can't just willy-nilly go down and start grabbing stuff and pull it up to your lab in Newport, Oregon. We had to apply for research permits to go to the Gulf through the U.S. State Department, who negotiates with the Mexican State Department. And I was lucky enough to be the lead scientist, the chief scientist, so we had to do all this permitting. And the book of permits was this thick. And of course, you can't collect any specimens and take them out of the country. The idea is to work with the local Mexican scientists, and I'll show you an example of that. Okay, here's the crew. Nice black and white photo. So Tony Berry, the captain, Tex Travis, the engineer, which if you've read the book, you know there's some great stories about the sea cow, the outboard motor that was on the baby flyer. 2 able-bodied seamen, Sparky Ania and Tiny Coletto. John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts, of course, and Carol Steinbeck, John Steinbeck's wife. So they departed on March 11th, went for 6 weeks. I'll show you some of the stations that they did that we repeated. So when they came back, they collaborated on publishing the Sea of Cortez, which is in that blue book there on the left. And it's got a 270-page narrative log plus 300 some pages of all the descriptions of the collection, which is this invaluable contribution to the science. So notice on Ed Ricketts' timeline that he unfortunately passed away in 1948. His car was actually hit by the train in Monterey, and he had an untimely early death. After that, John Steinbeck extracted the log from the Sea of Cortez and published it in 1951 as the log from the Sea of Cortez. So that's the book we mostly know. Going back to the Sea of Cortez, I forgot to mention this. They published it on December 5th, 1941. Anything else happen a couple days later? So it's like you do these press releases at, Oregon State University says, we're going to do a press release and we're going to time it so it gets all the attention. This is like the worst possible time to release a book. But the log, people always say, is what is it about? Well, it's got a lot of things in it. It's a nonfiction memoir. It's a travel log, but it's full of all kinds of little tidbits of philosophy, environmentalism, ecology. It emphasizes the interconnectedness between humans and our environment, and about the value of just being there, observing things. So if you happen to be here at the Big Blue Film Festival, we had a film about our trip, and in the words of Steinbeck and Ricketts, it was just, we liked it. We went on this adventure and we simply liked it. We didn't have this great plan, right, to do X, Y, Z, et cetera, drive ourselves really hard. It's just it's a form of being there and observing and seeing what happens. It's got humor and visionary perspective, and Rick Ruska said it forever altered the arc of environmentalism and marine biology in North America. And then I found out from Susan Schillinglaw, who's on our board, that's a Steinbeck scholar, that even Steinbeck himself would say that the log is one of his favorite among his books. So that's pretty cool. Inspired other books, which you might have read, Cannery Row or The Pearl. Okay, now I'm going to accelerate a little bit. These are shots of the vessel when it was in the Oregon, Washington, Southeast Alaska fisheries. You can see it loaded up with pots. It was in the 60s, it was renamed the Gemini. You can still see all the beautiful lines on the vessel. And then it went missing. And this guy, Bob Ania, who is the nephew of both Captain Tony Berry and Sparky Ania, the original crew and captain, started looking for it. And really couldn't find it until he started searching around by the call letters, the WB4044, and eventually located it in Anacortes, Washington. So this is another book, if you like to read about this story, by Kevin Bailey about the Western Flyer. Tells some of the things I'm telling you, but also the part of the Oregon and Washington. And he said that the Gemini was moored in the Swinomish Slough. Unbeknownst to almost everyone, the rusted and dilapidated boat was in fact the most famous fishing vessel ever to have sailed, the original Western Flyer. So it was in pretty desperate shape, having sunk at the dock. So let's talk about the restoration. And this is from 2015 to 2023, and carried out by what has become the Western Flyer Foundation, whose mission is to stir curiosity by connecting art and science in the spirit of John Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, and their journey on the Western Flyer. So this gentleman, John Gregg, who actually got a copy of the log when he was an 8-year-old back east and got psyched to be a marine person, later founded a drilling company and heard about this tale of the Western Flyer and wrested it away from another group that wanted to turn it into a restaurant. So they were literally going to chop it in half and put it in Monterey Bay. And John said, no, I'm going to grab it and restore it. And his goal is to try to use it to motivate young people about the ocean and the environment and participating in all things marine. And he's particularly interested in rural communities, hence Baja and hence the rural coast of Oregon. Okay, this is another important guy. This is Tom Keffer. He's our board president. He is a oceanographer. He got his PhD in oceanography from Oregon State University in 1980. And I actually have his thesis down there on the bottom. Mean and time-dependent temperature and vorticity balance in the subtropical North Atlantic. He was a postdoc at Woods Hole, 1981, 1984, faculty at Washington. And then he said, I need something else to do. I'm going to found a software company. And he was the guy that got in very early to what's called object-oriented programming, that is now how all the programming is done, and formed that Rogue Wave software company. Okay, so this is how I came into the picture. So Cinnamon mentioned I got my degree at Woods Hole, and I knew Tom there when he was a postdoc and I was a student. So fast forward 40 years, 35 years, he calls me up and he says, Jack, do you know anybody that knows anything about Oregon oceanography and something to do with marine studies and blending arts and science and all this stuff? And I said, Tom, you got the right guy. So he said, why don't you come give us some advice about using the vessel as an oceanographic platform? So I got the great good fortune to do that. And then I opened my mouth too many times, and I'm now on the board of the foundation. All right, so I'm going to blast through. I'm going to try to watch the time. This is going to be about the restoration and lots of cool pictures. Chris Chase was the lead shipwright up in Port Townsend, and we're just going to watch it be restored. If you really want to get into this, there's tons of footage, the video footage of the vessel being restored. If you can go to that site. So several of us took a trip up there. Let's see, when was this? 2019. You can see the flyer sitting in the shipwrights area there. Here it is looking inside. So on the right is the hull, and on the left is the deck house. And I've noted that portion that was sunk in the Puget Sound, we were only able to get about 10% back. The rest is new wood. But the opposite for the deck house. So it really is almost all original. 80% original. And you can see what poor shape it was in. It was all completely falling apart. But new parts started to being added. And of course, John Gregg was only the best. So he says, we're going to make things out of really interesting and good wood. So this is Purple Heart on the stem, put onto the original Doug fir. Here's Chris Chase showing off some of the Purple Heart in the stern. And then the ribs are going to be new Doug fir. The original nails were replaced with bronze hardware. You can see it stripped down to the ribs. And then I took this picture from the stern looking forward because I thought it looked like a cathedral. I mean, it's just got this, the lines to it are beautiful. So that's more Purple Heart on in the stern, and then you can see the parts of the oak ribs that were shaped and bent to fit on. Okay, a little bit more on the deck house. So you walk up to it and you can peek in the porthole, and there are the bunks that the crew sailed in 1940. And on the right-hand side is the restored bunks. And then we can look down into the hold where it was rebuilt with Alaskan yellow cedar. This is late 2019 now. Again, more sources there if you want to get into that. And then the planking all replaced with Sipo mahogany from Africa. So again, this attention to detail. So this is in March of 2020, putting on all of those, the planking. And then, voila, you've got it, the hull finished. Here's the paint job. And that green stripe is a trademark of the shipyard, that color green that we matched perfectly to the original one. When you touch the wood, it's just this beautiful sensation of strength, but almost a fine piece of woodwork. There's the deck house being restored, and when you get that done, whoops. Sorry, let me just say you have to mate it to the hull, of course, right? So get a giant crane and lift it on the top. This is just outside the building up in Port Townsend. And here is the captain's quarters inside the deck house, fully restored. That's my wife, Jane. She just had her shoulder fixed, so actually that's the left side. She could probably lay like that, but you can see how big it is. That bunk is a thwart ship. You guys know what that means? So the pointy ends towards you, it's going across a thwart, which matters because the thing's going to roll, right? Or pitch. So you figure out what motion your body can handle. The rest of them are along the axis of the. This is the only one that's a thwart. Here is the pilot house. A mess, and now beautifully restored to pretty much the original wood and hardware. It's not the original wheel, because there's a million stories. Maybe afterwards we'll talk about it, but somebody else has it, and they know that John Gregg has a lot of money, and so you can imagine what they want for it, and John Gregg said nope. So there is a limit. This is the galley. So all barnacle encrusted on the left there, and then that's the new galley, restored to its original beauty. And then this is a photo by Pat Webster that's just stunning. This is the galley where we gather to eat. That's a reproduction of the original stove, but that's electric. It's got I think it's inductive, actually, so as modern as you can get. And that's Captain Paul, who I'll talk about in just a minute. And then the photo of Ed Ricketts looking over our shoulders. You'll see that again in a minute. Not in a minute, in 20 minutes. All right, the propulsion was this original, I mentioned the 100-some horsepower. And it has been replaced with a diesel-electric hybrid. So again, John Gregg and the rest of us wanting to do something new and interesting, so we can run on batteries for 6 or 7 hours. So that allows you to go into the kelp beds silently, or you can do marine mammal observations and acoustics silently. This is an Italian company that makes this transfluid. And there's a single transmission that either that the diesel or the electric can feed, and then it goes to the drivetrain. And I'll just say right now that whenever you do something new, right, it's the bleeding edge of technology. This has caused us a fair bit of trouble, but we think we have it pretty much dialed in. All right, so it was fully restored pretty much by 22. Here it is being launched in Port Townsend. And then it came down the coast and stopped in Newport. So I was mentioning again to somebody earlier that I got a call from John Gregg, and he said, "Jack, do you know this guy named Paul Tate? He wants to be our captain." And I said, "Yeah, I sailed with Paul on the OSU research vessels. He'd be perfect for this." So John hired him, and then Paul's our captain, and he started the vessel down, and we stopped here for a couple of days in September of 23. And Emmy Daniels, the Hatfield artist in residence at the time, ran out and did a great original painting of the vessel, which you can see her holding up there right in front of the vessel. We had it right over here by I think it's Port Dock J or something like that on the south side. All right, next stop was Monterey. So this is the homecoming, November 4th, 2023. And there were thousands of people that came to the Monterey Wharf to welcome the flyer home. From Newport, it went to Moss Landing. So in Monterey Bay, Moss Landing's in the middle, Santa Cruz on the north, Monterey on the south. John Gregg has a boatyard there where we finished outfitting the lab. And then all of us got on board and sailed it from Moss Landing to Monterey, and were welcomed by the 1940s band, people dressed in 1940s outfits. It was really fun. We had the water cannons going, and through that porthole is me and a funny-looking guy next to me named Ray Troll. So he's a artist and musician, interesting character, also attracted by the Western Flyer. So at the time, he had the exhibition at the aquarium on the fossils, right? And a couple of the pieces in this building now are from Ray after I met him, and he said, "Jack, do you want any of these pieces?" And I said, "Of course." So they're upstairs here. There's one in the iLab and one on the third floor. All right, Gulf of California trip. This is the boat leaving Monterey on the 16th of March, 2025. See that little girl there in period piece? This is super cute, waving away. March 16th to June 24th, we took 100 days. They did it in 6 weeks. And we pretty much did the same trip down to Baja to those sampling stations that you see there. And we were accompanied by this cruise vessel, an uncruised 30-cabin cruise liner that shadowed the Western Flyer along the path. And the participants in the cruise got to come aboard the Western Flyer and help us do the science and hang out and do stuff like that. So that was our track from La Paz. Anybody been to La Paz here? What a fun place, right? This is being recorded, but I'll say all kinds of stuff. There's no rules in Mexico, right? Anyway, really interesting place. So we joined up with the Safari Voyager and then headed north, and that's pretty much the same track that Steinbeck and Ricketts took, except they went to the eastern side of the Gulf and went along the Mexican mainland. We did not. So we short-circuited it just a little bit. So one of these things is you don't just parachute in and not work with everybody in the area. So this is all the different groups we work with in Baja. So these are NGOs, groups interested in education, et cetera, et cetera. So it was part of us going down there was to see what we could see and establish connections for the next time we were going to go down. So the idea is to go down every other year to Baja and every other year to Oregon and Washington. Here's the crew. So there's underwater Pat. He's the only guy that gets color. So he's a naturalist on the Lindblad and National Geographic cruise ships and an underwater photographer. And he's really good at what he does. So you get photos like this instead of crummy ones like I take. There's Captain Paul Tate, co-captain Andrea Costo, first mate Phil Sconce, who's from here. Paul met him and said, why don't you come along? Marine tech Jenny Johnson. And then super important guy Mike, the cook Mike. And then I got the big title of chief scientist for all two of us scientists. And Adrian Munguia Vega was a Mexican scientist that we reached out to, and he and I did samples up and down the Gulf. Super fun guy. And there's that beautiful photograph again in front of Isla San Esteban in the Midriff Islands. Just the sheer beauty of the Gulf, the world's aquarium. So you see the desert. Of course, if you go on walks or a burro ride, as Steinbeck and Ricketts did, you'll see all kinds of things in the desert. But when you go beneath water, it's just profound amount of life. And Pat Webster was great at capturing it. This is a heliaster in the northern Gulf, frigate bird over on the right, and then who knows what's that on the upper right? What is it? Yeah, this is a bioluminescent wake. So you're cruising along under these beautiful stars, and you look back off the stern, and as far as you can see, the churning up of the water has caused bioluminescence in the organisms. And Pat and I were out here, I don't know, at midnight or something, and I don't have my cell phone. I got my cell phone, and I'm trying to take a picture of it. And he goes, Jack, you have no idea what you're doing. So I go, all right, well, teach me. So he grabs my phone, puts it in the manual mode that we never do, right? We all just take auto, fixes the aperture, the exposure, and all that. And he says, now try it. And my picture's not too different than that, but you could have never taken it without a guy teaching you how to do it. All right, so we did tons of education, tons of outreach, and I just want to show you the people and the places and motivate you for this connection between science, peoples of our nations. In fact, when Tom and I went to the Mexican consulate in Portland to get our visas, the consulate general there said, please, can we have a better connection between our countries? And can we use this to pull us together? And we said, absolutely, that's what this is all about. So this is just some groups, the students on the right looking at the Echo Sounder and ROV, remotely operated vehicles. We held community events with hundreds and thousands of people in each of the ports we went to. We did boat tours, and I'll show you some close-ups of this stuff. So here's La Paz. This is our first community event. We pulled up at the main pier there, and we advertised an event, and it was 105 degrees or something in the sun, and 1,000 people waited in line to come on board. In the tents along the pier were about 15 groups that are doing marine education and marine research and marine conservation in the area. Super enthusiastic about having this vessel come to that catalyzes this connection. For sure, when Ricketts and Steinbeck came, there was none of that, right? There was no Eco Alianza coming down and talking to them at the pier. You see the young woman with the captain's hat saluting Captain Andrea. We had a band. We had lots of speeches. I got stuck down in the hold because as people came through, we were telling them about the research we were doing. Now, a couple good things about that. This is the only place that's air conditioned on the whole boat. So I was sitting down there just chilling out, as they say. But these two young middle school students from La Paz volunteered to help run the tours because my Spanish is not too great. So what we did is I gave the first tour to about 20 people, and they sat and listened like you guys are. And then from then on, they did all the tours in Spanish. Just picked it up like that. Santa Rosalia. This is up a ways, an old mining town. Actually, there's still lots of mining going on. I think it's actually a South Korean company that owns the mines in the place. So that sort of thing still goes on. But we were welcomed with open arms by the Santa Rosalia community. And amazingly enough, they had made a bunch of little flyers for us, a bunch of mini flyers that they had carved out of wood. And they gave us 60 of them. So I brought the one that I got for you guys to check out afterwards. Super, super cute little flyers. Our jaws just dropped. And we had planned to give them a piece of wood with the old nails from the boat. And so we're like kind of sheepishly give that to them. Actually, there was a big flyer too. I don't have a photo of it. They made a big one too, like this. We were welcomed by the local native people, the Cochimi Indians, and they did some traditional dancing. You can see hopefully you can see the deer antlers on their heads. And I didn't point it out, but on the very mast of the flyer is antlers for good luck from the Sicilian fishermen of Monterey Bay. So that was an interesting connection. Agua Verde, another really beautiful spot for getting in the water. So these are young kids and their families using our ROV to see what's underneath in their waters. Puerto Escondido and Loreto. I love this one in the upper left of Captain Paul with his group of sailors looking out from the Western Flyer. Nestled in there among the cruisers on the lower left. And then again, lots of students getting their hands on oceanographic equipment, whether it be a Secchi disc, which is a 100-year-old piece of equipment that tells the visibility, or a brand new remotely operated vehicle that swims under the water. We're cruising between these sites and the cruise vessels behind us, and every night we dock or anchor in those spots, and then next morning we take off. Lots of transit, way too much travel. I wish we'd stayed put more. The only time that Adrian and I got to sample many times was in the middle of the night during the transits. The flyer was actually faster than the big cruise vessel. So we would cruise ahead, find a station and lower our instruments down, and then zip up to the next anchorage before they would arrive. And Steinbeck and Ricketts knew lots about the surface of the ocean. They knew the temperature, and maybe they knew something about the plankton in the water, and they knew about the rocking intertidal, but they didn't plumb the depths with anything, which is what we can do now, right? We can send instruments down. We had 500 meters of rope, so that's how deep we went, even though it's thousands of meters deep in the rift of the Gulf of California. And sometimes we got a special investigación en proceso label. And we would do CTDs. Oh, and Adrian would take eDNA samples, environmental DNA, from 200 or 300 meters down, because he's interested in the distributions of fishes and invertebrates in the Gulf. So just this is the kind of data that we got. This is from a CTD in Salsis Puedes channel, which translates to leave if you can. It's sort of a scary place. This was in the middle of the night up there between those islands. And the 500-meter cast, we've got the salinity. Notice how it's high at the surface and lower at the bottom. That's opposite of our ocean. Our ocean, the salinity is low in the surface and high at the bottom. And that's because here we have both river input and subarctic water coming in at the surface, which is fresher. And the Gulf, it's an evaporative basin. So it's actually saltier at the surface. Temperature decreasing as you go down. There's chlorophyll, fluorescence, oxygen, and pH. And then you can put all those together along the Gulf. So we took a bunch of stations, and you can make plots like this that show you what the oceanography looks like. So the one thing I want you to notice here is that the lines, the horizontal lines, warmer on the top, cold, and then halfway up they kind of get mixed up. That's where the water moving across those islands mixes up, brings those nutrients to the surface, and that's where it's particularly productive, up there halfway up the Gulf. All right, we also did some intertidal surveys, certainly not as carefully as Ed Ricketts did it, but Bill Gilley from Stanford University led actually the uncruised passengers in surveying the same intertidal sites that Ricketts sampled, and then compared those for the number of species and that sort of thing. So I would say a cursory look at how things changed over 85 years. So again, I can't emphasize what a stunning place. This is a Dawn CTD station off Isla Tiburon. Captain Paul, myself, and Adrian. And you have to get your sun hats and your favorite marine tech to help out. And sometimes you need other things to help out. So we're doing our best Ricketts imitation there. This might have even been in the morning. Okay, so here's that uncruised vessel, the folks that were on board. They were all totally into the science and into Steinbeck and Ricketts, and just had a great time. You can see the two vessels together there. And we're planning to go back in spring of 27, so every other year. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to check this out. It's really a great trip. So here's our idea for the Pacific Northwest. This is our planned trip, but I'm going to ask you guys to help us make it happen. So we're going to depart Monterey, hopefully mid-April, come up to Charleston, Coos Bay. Remember, we're visiting the rural communities. Come on up to Newport, and then we're going to finish there and head up to Port Townsend to bring the vessel home to where she was restored. And then go back, as I mentioned, to the Sea of Cortez in April of 27 and repeat and so forth. So the Western Flyer Foundation is a nonprofit, and we rely on community support. So I'm asking you guys, if you're interested in helping us bring the flyer up to Newport and to Oregon in general, consider chipping in with the many other people that have already helped us. And thanks to you that have helped already. It's been It's been very kind. We want to be able to do the education and outreach at no cost to the students. So we'll run those similar programs that you saw in Baja up here in Oregon and up into Port Townsend. So thanks for your attention and happy to answer questions.
Jack, I always appreciate your storytelling. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to open up for questions, but we'll go back and forth between online and in the room. So Roseanne, any questions online? Okay, for folks online, if you put those questions in the chat box, we'll get to them if we can. How about questions in the room? All right, you're going to have to work with me as I work this mic around everyone.
I was just curious. I saw a post about Australia recently. The fires in Australia are killing a lot of mammals, but they said that their ocean was so hot that it was killing the sea creatures also. Are we worried about that on our side of the ocean?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is what we call a marine heat wave. And absolutely in many parts of the world's oceans, including ours, what happens is the upper ocean gets abnormally warm, maybe by, in this last one we had, it's probably 8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal. They can last from months to years. And our Australian colleagues are actually the ones that invented a little metric, how hot is it? Because of what they were seeing off the Great Barrier Reef. We've applied that here as well, and you can see the marine heat waves. Yep.
I've got 2 questions. One's pretty quick, probably. You said that the drivetrain is both diesel and electric. You called it a hybrid. I assume that generating or recharging the batteries is just by the engine using an alternator to charge the batteries. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
So just like in your car, you're recharging the battery as you go along.
And my other question, your salinity profiles being opposite of what they are up here, and you commented about the Gulf being, what did you call it?
It evaporates there.
An evaporative basin. But also, there's no water coming in from the Colorado River anymore. I'm guessing that profile would be a little bit different if the Colorado River was still flowing there. Surface water would stay more on top. But I guess also just any speculation you have about how that's changed the ecology of the Gulf of California with the loss of the freshwater inflow.
Yeah, so that area in particular was to the north of where we were. But I know that there are scientists here that are looking at marine mammals in that area and how things have changed. I actually don't know too much about the actual oceanography north of where we were.
All right, we got another question in the room.
I'm wondering about the Purple Heart used in the construction. What's the significance of that? Second question would be, it sunk, and we were kind of wondering how did it sink, if a brief history on that. And also if there's going to be notification when it does arrive, if we can get on an email list or something like that.
I think I saw, were you the wooden boat guy?
No.
Okay. There's somebody here that's associated with the wooden boat group. Anyway, again, the woods were chosen to match the original stuff as much as possible, but to make use of new woods that were available to be brought in from much farther afield than they would have done in 1937. So the Purple Heart just being a dense wood that can wear well. Why did it sink? I think just neglect. Just an old boat that people weren't paying attention to, and it sunk at the dock. I think it was underwater for up to 6 months or something like that. And then the last question is absolutely, we're going to let everybody know. We have a fundraising goal to try to make sure we make the voyage. I'm pretty sure we're going to make it, and then we'll lock in the dates. I'm teaching a class at OSU in the Honors College on the log from the Sea of Cortez in intertidal ecology. And I know for sure on that day, I'm going to go on the record here, the 16th of May is when my class is going to go out on the boat, so I sure hope it's here.
Jack, will you go back one more slide and put that link for the newsletter up? There you go. That's another place to get information.
Yeah,
All right.
so that we have both a newsletter you can sign up for, and that's a QR code to take to the Oregon fundraising effort.
Okay, we're going to have one more question. Who really wants it? I know it's Steve wants it. I can tell already. I'm going to sneak in front of you too. Thank you so much.
Jack, you mentioned early on in your introduction that unlike the previous, the first trip, that coming back this time, no specimens. So I want to focus quick on the underwater observations. You mentioned the ROV work. So where are the videos? Who's taking care of all of that? That's question one. And question two, during the Oregon leg that's coming up here, we think it'd be great to revisit the CORE, the Cooperative Offshore Reef Ecosystem Study off our coast 35 years ago down the southern Oregon coast. Let's make that happen.
I love that, Steve. Let's make that happen. I should say we're open for business as a research charter too, for sure. But let's figure out how to make that happen. Everything that we took electronically, whether it be those casts that I showed you, the echo sounder, acoustic returns, or the ROV footage, we are archiving. We're submitting actually by March 15th to the Mexican agencies as part of our permit requirement. And then those things will go into the various archives. And Steve, just specifically, we went to a few of their marine protected areas and did some transect studies, but it was like a little sip of what could be done. We need to do a set up with the Mexican scientists a quantitative transect survey that you repeat every 2 years. Yep.
All right, we're going to wrap it up there because we're at our time, and I just want to respect everybody's ability to get home safely. So one more round of applause for Jack, please.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we'll see you here next month on March 18th. Thank you again, Jack.
Come see the little baby flyer if you want to see it.